Today, we'll be analyzing castles based on the best defensive scaling, resource management, and anti-siege mechanics. Some castles were S-tier fortresses that forced a complete wipe on any invading army, while others could barely be called a home. Regardless of their base stats, they shared a common mission, providing a multi-layered tool to the king's arsenal. But even with a massive gold investment, a build could fail if the player ignored fundamental terrain stats or game mechanics. We've ranked these iconic fortresses to see which one actually dominated their era's meta. Kicking the list off with D tier. Skenfrith is what happens when a player specs into roundkeep tech but completely ignores the terrain awareness stat. On paper, a round tower is a solid buff as it deflects projectiles and is harder to mine under. However, the devs who built Skenfrith decided to spawn it in a flood-prone valley. The original 11th century build was a basic wooden starter kit. That changed in the 13th century when pro builder Hubert de Burgh took over. Having seen the latest French meta, de Burgh wiped the old wooden site and rebuilt Skenfrith from scratch using high-tier stone. Despite the stone upgrades, Skenfrith's map placement remained its greatest vulnerability. It was built on flat, riverside ground, offering zero height advantage over the surrounding hills. Furthermore, the proximity to the river Mono created a permanent flooding debuff. The lower residential levels were so prone to water damage that medieval engineers eventually had to fill them with earth just to keep the foundation from despawning. By 1282, King Edward I successfully conquered the Welsh server, and without a hostile border to guard, the castle's military significance vanished. Moving further down D tier, we have Eulo Castle, a build that practically invented the low ground debuff. While it features some unique Welsh regional tech, its map placement is a textbook example of a tactical disaster. Eulo utilizes a characteristic Welsh horseshoe plan. The central element is a D-shaped tower built on a rocky hill. The architecture also included a secondary cylindrical tower on the western outer bailey for storage and extra garrison housing. Unusually, there was no direct internal connection between the upper ward and the outer bailey, meaning your units would have to cross a makeshift footbridge or leave the walls to rotate between sections. The castle's builder, Llewellyn Gruffydd, described the castle as being built in the corner of the wood, giving it the zero visibility perk. The castle was tucked away in a deep valley south of Wepre Brook. While the slopes gave some protection from the north, the southern and eastern sides were completely dominated by rising ground. Archers in the surrounding hills could essentially spawn-kill defenders in the courtyard, which is why people believe it was built as more of a statement than a serious fortress. We give it a D tier because even though the architecture is innovative, the map placement is an F. Moving into the C tier, we're entering the realm of the mid-game builds. Starting with the Chateau de Pierrefonds. If you're looking for a castle that screams S-tier aesthetics, this is it. It's got massive towers, double-layered battlements, and the kind of verticality that makes it look like the final boss level of a campaign. In the actual 14th century military meta, however, it was a bit of a glass cannon. It spec'd heavily into quality of life tech, featuring attached rooflines and luxurious interior layouts that made it the pinnacle of comfort. The walls stand tall, yet they lack the sheer thickness needed to tank hits from late-game artillery. The offensive capability is a 6 out of 10, because the layout has a major mechanical flaw. The towers are grouped in a way that creates blind spots at the corners, giving savvy attackers a stealth window to approach the walls without being targeted. With a 2 out of 10 economic ROI rating, it is a total gold sink. The staffing and heating costs alone would bankrupt a mid-tier faction. A similar fate was shared by the Chateau Gaillard. Built by Richard the Lionheart in 1198, it was supposed to be the S-tier invincible build that would break the game. On paper, the specs were cracked. It featured 5 layers of defense, 3-meter thick walls, and innovative curved masonry designed to deflect trebuchet fire and eliminate blind spots. Richard even called it his child and boasted it was borderline impenetrable. But in the 13th century meta, it fell in just 6 months to the French monarch Philip Augustus. First, the layout was just a mess. Richard tried to force a concentric design onto a narrow, long cliff. This meant the castle was split into 3 separate zones by moats and bridges. If the outer zone got breached, the defenders in the keep couldn't rotate to help because of the very ditches meant to protect them. Second, the inner bailey was connected by a rock bridge that couldn't be raised or destroyed. Once the French took the middle zone, they just walked across the bridge like it was a welcoming mat, making it an ideal case of style over substance. Unlike our B-tier build, Hermitage Castle, known as the guardhouse of the bloodiest valley in Britain, this castle is basically an evolved tower house that skipped the pretty palace upgrades and put everything into defense and cost efficiency stats. The lore of this place is as dark as its masonry. In the early days, the area was held by William de Sols, a man so widely hated that local legends claim he was boiled alive in molten lead by his own neighbors. By 1338, the castle fell to Sir William Douglas, who famously starved his rival to death in the dungeons. In architectural terms, however, Hermitage is a fascinating evolution of the tower house meta. They added 4 giant corner towers and the castle's most distinctive feature, those massive blind arches, which not only looked pretty, but were also designed to support wooden hoarding platforms. This created a 360-degree kill zone where defenders could rain projectiles straight down onto anyone touching the walls. Hermitage, therefore, sits firmly in the B tier because it is the ultimate value king. It lacks the expensive, sprawling curtain walls of S tier builds, but its massive thickness and efficient design made it nearly impossible to breach without heavy artillery. Moving into the A tier, we hit the true invincibles, starting with the ultimate power flex of the Norman server, the Tower of London, the high-tier fortress palace that has been at the center of the English factions meta since 1066. Strategically, this build is a masterclass in landmark siting. It's parked right on a bend in River Thames, functioning as the gateway to the capital and a crucial demarcation point between the power of the city and the power of the monarchy. In terms of raw stats, the tower is an absolute tank. Its 4.6 meter thick masonry was the peak of 11th century military tech, and the 13th century expansions by Henry III and Edward I turned it into a model concentric fortress. The only real weakness here is the economic ROI stat. This is a high-maintenance royal brand build. It's a massive gold sink to keep the garrison running and the masonry from decaying, especially as modern urban development starts to encroach on its visual dominance. The tower, nevertheless, proves that if you build your base thick enough and centralize all your faction's essential services, you get a meta-defining build. Much like Corfe Castle. Standing atop a 55-meter high hill, this gleaming tower of Purbeck limestone was built by William the Conqueror's successors to lock down the transit routes between England and the Norman heartlands. In 1139, during the Anarchy Civil War, King Stephen tried to besiege Corfe but couldn't even make a dent. He actually had to build a second fake castle nearby just to sustain his own army while he stared at Corfe's walls. He eventually gave up and abandoned the site, proving that Corfe's defensive scaling was simply too high for the mid-game meta. In terms of offensive capability, Henry III turned the castle into a regional ammo depot to store thousands of crossbow bolts for campaigns across the server. It was a logistical powerhouse that could support friendly factions from miles away. Parliament was so intimidated by the castle's defensive stats that they ordered a team of sappers to use explosives to manually delete the structure so it could never be used against them again. Even in its ruined state, Corfe remains an A-tier legend. It's a testament to the fact that if you pick the right terrain and spend your gold on a limestone keep upgrade, you can force the strongest of kings on the server to build their own base just to look at yours. But you need much more to make it to the S tier, something the Craque des Chevaliers has in abundance. This is the Game Breaker, the build that is so overpowered it basically forced the opposing faction to stop playing. The lore behind this base is just pure power gaming. Built by the Knights Hospitaller, it was so tanky that even the legendary Sultan Saladin took one look at its stats and decided to bypass it entirely rather than risk a siege. The build is the gold standard for concentric defense. It features 2 massive independent rings of stone. The outer wall forms an 800-meter perimeter, standing 30 meters high and averaging 6 meters in thickness. Even if an attacker somehow breached that first line, they'd find themselves trapped in a killing zone between the outer wall and the even more massive inner citadel, creating a multi-layered nightmare for any invading army. The architecture is a high-level blend of European Gothic and Eastern influence, constructed with local limestone. Its most iconic feature is the Tower of Homage, which provides a neat surveillance peak over the entire valley. The interior is a massive network of chapels, halls, and storage rooms that allowed a garrison of 2,000 knights to hold out for years without a resupply. The castle only changed hands in 1271 when the Mamluk Sultanate finally captured it, and even then, it was due to a tactical surrender after the outer defenses were finally compromised. So, There we have it. From the sewer exploit disasters of the C tier to the absolute final boss architecture of the S tier, we've broken down the best and worst builds in the medieval world. Each of these castles holds value in its own way, but we've ranked them based on who actually dominated in their era's meta and who just got griefed by bad terrain and poor design.